to read primarily from the new book, just out, Nothing Between Us, that was runner-up for the Del Sol Prize. Nothing Between Us, The Berkeley Years, is really a novel told in prose poems or flash fiction pieces. It's the story, and there is a story that follows a love relationship. The story is based on my own experiences, but it is a work of fiction. I had thought of it as a memoir while I was writing it, or as if I was really writing out of my own life, which I was. But I realized looking back, and most of these pieces were composed between 94 and 98, and I realized looking back just how much I did fictionalize, how much did creep in and became worked and reworked and shifted and changed. The book focuses on a period of time that was explosive and exciting in our culture's history, the late 60s. It focuses on a time when there were changes of all sorts happening in our country. For women in the 60s, the Presidential Commission of the Status of Women in 1963, sexuality changed enormously with the advent of the pill. Suddenly, there was not that fear of getting pregnant for people who took the pill. The Feminine Mystique, Betty Friedan's book. Fashions shifted enormously. The miniskirt, people burned bras, literally, people stopped wearing bras. These were huge changes. And there was an enormous amount of violence. The assassinations, JFK 1963, the Watts riots 1965, Malcolm X assassinated 1966, which led to the formation of the Black Panther Party in 1966 also. Martin Luther King's assassination, April 68. His I Have a Dream speech, by the way, if you don't remember, was 1963. Robert Kennedy assassinated June of 1968, and the Chicago riots during the Democratic National Convention, also in the summer of 1968. All of this, of course, is surrounded by the Vietnam War. Not only among the, quote, hippies, but there was a sort of whole sense of encouraging freedom, of bursting beyond boundaries that had previously kept us in boxes, a desire and attempts to explore one's own potential, to create one's capital S self, to do all these things that seemed possible somehow in 1968. One of the sort of mantras that I remember from that period was, try it, you'll like it. As you noticed how many of those things happened that year. It's been called the year of rage. And it was that year that my former husband and I moved from Phoenix, Arizona to the epicenter of the 60s, Berkeley, California. We had teaching jobs, teaching offers to teach in the public schools, and that was when we hit Berkeley. That was also the year that the Berkeley public schools first and famously desegregated their school district. Berkeley had been, before that time, two Berkeleys. There was the white Berkeley in the hills of Cal faculty, various other professional families, and then there was, in the flats, the African-American Berkeley, and in between, some sort of probably folks like us, okay, sort of Midland folks. Anyway, the schools had been completely separate. The faculties had been separate, white faculty, white kids, black faculty, black kids, that sort of thing. In '68, they inaugurated a complete integration system, and everybody was mixed up. And I ended up teaching at all ninth grade. If you can imagine one school of nothing but something like 1,500 14-year-olds. I ended up teaching this school, which is down in the Black Flats in the industrial area, in an almost entirely African-American neighborhood, where the faculty had been integrated and the students also. So that was where I arrived in my mid-20s in 1968. The school district was still following a system that I hope you aren't familiar with now, tracking, whereas kids were tested and then they were tracked. I think there were 13 tracks. So there was track 1 with those Cal faculty, quote, brats, at the top all the way down to track 13, and then there was remedial below that. And you can imagine how the racial demographics worked there. There was still tracking, but they were also trying some experiments. And one of the experiments was to do some heterogeneous classes, as they called, and then also to give lots of English electives. So I found myself teaching, for instance, a class in poetry and pop music, and as you will see, also teaching a class for the first time in Black literature. And I'm going to begin with the first poem in Nothing Between Us. I don't know whether we want to call these prose poems or flash fiction pieces. The pieces that have been published in journals have been called one or the other or both. I think the book sort of falls between genre cracks. But the first prose poem in, I'll just use that phrase, in Nothing Between Us is called Teaching Uncle Tom's Children. And for those of you who don't know, Uncle Tom's Children is a collection of stories by Richard Wright, where he's kind of riffing off of Harriet Beecher Stowe's 19th century novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And the title of my poem is Teaching Uncle Tom's Children, which, as you can see, has a sort of double edge to it. There are some other books that I refer to in the piece. Native Son and Black Boy are also by Richard Wright. Nigger, that I refer to, is the title of Dick Gregory's autobiography. Teaching Uncle Tom's Children. He was the only other honky in the room, but wasn't. Blonde and natural. Was his mother or his dad white or black? Kid played the best sax in town and only 14. Sax so sweet and cool, the moon rose cream over the hills and stars broke the fog. He didn't talk much. Neither did I, that first blacklit class any of us taught. I didn't know what to put on the board. Erased everything I'd written before, but the erasers were full of dust from the chalk. The blackboard turned powdery, a blur, clouded. We moved on through Nigger, Black Boy, Native Son. Not a kid caused trouble. Small sounds, fingers flipping the white pages of the paperbacks I collected and stacked in the corner cupboard after class. Slap of gum stretching in and out of a mouth, hard sole of a shoe on the floor, scraping the surface, an emery board. And the train, track barely a block away, the train running the whole length of the San Francisco Bay, cry moving ahead of it, toward us, that way.
Wendy Barker's poems take us places we never expected to visit and create for us portals to the sublime. I'm reminded of the tone of many of Yeats' poems, like the Song of Wandering Angus, the manner in which she suddenly made in one of my favorite of her poems, not possible, but probable, the idea of mermaid.